Hello, everyone. It's just me again. Wanted to do a follow-up review on the book. This is that book we discussed last video about Black Jews in Africa and in the Americas by Tudor Parfitt. Previously, we discussed a little bit about Tudor Parfitt, that, he's an academic, he's a researcher, very well established, very well respected in both the scientific and academic communities. And his research was surrounding these various tribes that are dispersed throughout the globe. Specifically for this book, it's the tribes in Africa that have oral traditions um, that point them back to Israel. And some of his book, it just covers like everything. It covers some of the geneticist part. It covers some of the history, just bunch of ethnography and things of that nature. And um, but the great thing about this guy is I finished the book. I finished it, yay! So I finished the book. What I want to do was just share a few pieces of data um, based off the last chapter that kind of pointed and it kind of substantiates what I had previously said about the Limba and their genetic makeup. So we're going to jump right into the last chapter, which is, there it is right there. And we're going to jump right into this part right here that deals with this gentleman, basically named Trefor Jenkins, who is a distinguished geneticist in Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg. Basically, he was introduced to this whole idea of the Limba and them having affinity to Israel and their oral traditions and whatnot that they had claimed through his friend, who was a physicist named Frank Nabarro. His wife was a school teacher, or a music school teacher, I believe, and then she also they were both Sephardi, so they had, even though that they were interested in this topic, or he was interested in this topic, he actually was family that came from Sephardi. So that would be those tribes that out of after the initial diaspora, they found themselves in Spain and Portugal, and then after um, the expulsion in around the late 1400s, they moved into portions of Africa, west and north, and then also to various portions of east of Europe. And some would say, I believe there's also some in Asia, and or maybe India. But either way, very um, interesting, um, very interesting part of this book dealing with this gentleman and his research, because his goal is he has his personal interest. He wants to dive into the Limba from a genetic standpoint versus just their oral tradition and the various histories about them, or historicities about the Limba going back, that came up, through various means, um, and engagement with Europeans, and also too with ethnographers and what have you. So we're going to get right into that part. At the end, it says, so Jenkins was inspired to put the Limba and outside commentators to the test. For the first time in thousands of years of constructions of Jewish identity in Africa, and after countless claims of Jewish Semitic ancestry with respect to myriad groups, it was possible to put the question of distant oracle origins to an objective test on the basis of DNA samples from 49 Limbamen. Jenkins, 49 Limbamen, Jenkins wrote what was a historical article which was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, 1996. The result of the paper, let me get in, I don't know if you guys can see that. Okay, you can probably see that now. So the results of the paper, were that 50% of the Limba Y chromosome tested were of Semitic origin. You see that, guys? 50% of the Limba. 40% were Negroid. and the ancestry of the remaining could not be resolved. Right? So this is what we were talking about the other day. We talked a little bit about the Yoruba and the Igbo, and how they have populations, Jewish populations um, that have oral traditions that claim affinity to Israel, um, um, and what have you, and also too, this kind of is similar or synonymous to what we found when some of these populations, like the Igbo, tested, right? They actually, when they tested the Igbo, we know that they found two different haplogroups, one that had pointed to a Jewish origin, and then one that pointed more to a Bantu. Now, the thing that's fascinating about that is what you take the Igbo, one has one haplogroup, the other one has another one. They look almost the same to the outward eye, right? Because they're both dark-skinned people. You just assume they're just one group of people, but from an ethnic standpoint, the haplogroup that they or from a genetic standpoint, the haplogroup they carry proves or points to two different ancient ancestry lines, right? Basically, laying down the fact that they're ethnic from an ethnic standpoint, they're different, right? They have similar phenotypes, but they're different. They have similar phenotypes based off because of geography and because of admixture, but from a concrete or basically from a genetic standpoint, they're ethnically different because they have two different haplogroups. So the thing that's fascinating is right after we get to that line, it says basically these Y specific genetic findings are consistent with the Limba's oral tradition, and the analysis of the history of Jewish people and their association with Africa indicates that the historical facts are not incompatible with the theories concerning the origin of the Limba. So with all what they're saying is kind of like I was saying before, with all of this, with all of the oral tradition of the Limba, and then all of the external commentary about the Limba, all of this is proving itself out when looking at the DNA. And then with the DNA, you have migration patterns, right? So with this 50, I think it's what, 40, did I say 40% are of Limba, and that are 50% are of Limba Y chromosome, and the 40 was of Negroid. So you can take those two different groups and you can find migration patterns that prove who they are. The Negroid would follow a migration pattern that resembles those of very specific Bantu groups, while the other 50% of the Limba Y chromosome that were Semitic would actually follow a migration pattern similar to other Semitic groups, like the Sephardim or the Ashkenazi. The farther you go back, they would be more similarities there because they are all linked to a common ancestor from a genetic standpoint. So this is what's so fascinating about genetics is it, in the West, we've been so brainwashed to look at the external and just to look at things like skin color, eye color, like phenotypes, and that's it. And I just feel that that's not the best way, like, to really make a determination, distinguish one's ethnicity. But with this approach to this type of research and this type of approach with the scientific genetic using the Y chromosome, you can really know who a person is. You can really figure out where did these people move, where did they go, and what have you. And it kind of breaks down the laws or the rules that we have in the West surrounding skin color. Like, we're really fixated on skin color because of the history, right? There's a lot of philosophical stuff that that our history points to that is not really based on science. So, that's a whole other topic. But either way, we'll just go ahead and that was one part I want to read you. Was a little bit about those testing, but let's see if we can dig into this second part a little bit. So we read about the limba and oral, and basically that their genetic findings matched the oral tradition and the outside commentary regarding their oral tradition coming from Israel. But we get here, let's see where it says, okay, this study made use of Y chromosome markers and had constructed haplotypes for 188 males, which showed specific let's see, yeah, specific haplotype was common among the hereditary Jewish priestly caste, the Kohanim, right? Who, according to the Bible and Jewish tradition, are patrilineal descendants of the founder of the priestly clan, Aaron, the brother of Moses, right? So the following year, another study extended the Y haplogroup to include 5 further markers. And basically, what we see here, more specifically, the Kohanim marker. The name it says right there is the Cohen modal haplotype. It says the CHM is found in members of the Jewish priesthood. It says in parentheses 50%, 50%, 56% in the Sephardi, and 45% in the Ashkenazi, and between 3 and 5% in general Jewish non-priestly families. So this kind of goes into what we were talking about. There's actual haplogroups that are associated with migration patterns. Well, there's haplogroups that are considered the Jewish, or I wouldn't say Jewish, but haplogroups that are associated with the Levantine or ancient Israel. And then there's also, like in this case, this paternal haplogroup called the Kohanim as well. But we do know that, like, if you look at the Israel Natufian, basically the Israel Natufian findings that they found years ago, I believe what they found was the common haplogroups was the E haplogroup and the J haplogroup, right? So you have subclades of E that point to Israelite ancestry, and then you have subclades of J. But there's also other haplogroups as well, right? But the one that's very specific that points to ancient Israel, to a common ancestor in ancient Israel, is the Kohanim. And that's what we're talking about with this CHM, right? So what we find out with Jenkins in his study, and we're going to kind of skip right down to it, to the paper. It says basically after they collected all the data, the ensuing paper, which analyzed 399 chromosome in 6 populations, which included the Limba, the Bantu and Ashkenazi, and the Sephardi, discovered that the Limba Y chromosomes were divided into both Shemitic and Bantu clades, and that one of the Limba subclans, the Buba, which traditionally contained the Limba's priesthood, to our surprise, carried the CMH at high frequency. So this is the part, and we're just going to stop there. This is the part that I wanted to touch, right? This is so fascinating, guys, because what we're finding out is up until these tests were taken, the whole thing about the Limba being tied or having ancient ancestry pointing to Israel was just kind of like, a fairy tale. Nobody really believed it. Some people believed it. It was just kind of mixed in. But the thing is with the DNA testing, they were able to prove this thing out. And they were actually able to prove that the Limba not only carry Shemitic haplogroups, but they actually had subpopulations that carried a Shemitic haplogroup that pointed to a common ancestor that descended from the tribe of Aaron, right? And all other Jewish populations usually have a frequency of this haplogroup in measure. In the Limba population, it was in high frequency. I've heard some say that it was higher than both the Sephardi and Ashkenaz. So that's the fascinating part about this whole topic and this whole story. It gets into this idea of how does this stuff even work? How does genetics work? Why, and then you get into this whole concept of what is the difference between genotypes and phenotypes, and what has influence on your phenotypes, and what has it, and what have you, right? What we do know is that your haplogroup, your paternal haplogroup, um, usually goes a long way. So you can, like I say, in the case with the Kohanim, we can map that all the way back to someone in the time of Aaron, right? And same with the E haplogroup, we can map that way back past the Israel Natufian period, or actually to the Israel Natufian period. Same with J. So the thing that's interesting is when you look at the diaspora and you look at how these different populations moved across the world, they moved into different parts of the globe, and they all now resemble different phenotypes, but they all carry similar haplogroups or similar DNA or migration patterns. Whether you go to the Jews of Asia or you go to the Jews of India, you go to the northeastern Jew, the northeast European Jews. If you go to the Sephardim, the Ashkenaz, and then now what we're seeing is even in Africa, whether it's the Igbo or the Yoruba or the Falasha, the Ethiopian, or the Yoruba, we're finding these similarities in their DNA, which, regardless of their oral tradition, regardless of if people believe it or not, it's substantiating that who they really are. They're descendants of the tribes of Israel. So this book is fascinating. You need to pick it up if you're interested in this topic. There's a series of books that he's written, but this is probably my favorite. Definitely go pick it up. And I really appreciate you guys for listening to this video. Click like if you like the videos, and I will probably be giving you a list of some of the other books that I have regarding the diaspora in general, and I think you appreciate that. I think if you haven't heard of them, but I'll do that in another video. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen, and I hope you have a great week and rest of the week and weekend.